Hello, I would like to introduce you to our team. Heather, Angie, Bethany, Joni, Haley, and Crystal. Today we are going to talk to you about unconscious bias training and why it should be a priority in the workplace.
Good afternoon. Today we're going to introduce you to a training that we created based on unconscious bias in the workplace. Training overview. Did you know 48% of African American women and 47% of Latina women report being mistaken for administrative support or custodial staff? More than 60% of male CEOs in the U.S. are over 6 feet tall, despite the fact that less than 15% of American men ever reach that height. So what's going on? Neuroscience research confirms that unconscious bias is universally wired into all of us. People carry unconscious biases, both positive and negative, that shape how they act and treat others by going through our training. You will find more about this interesting topic and what it means for you and for those around you. This training will introduce you to the idea of unconscious bias and how it can impact on the workplace. It will give you the opportunity to think about situations where your own unconscious bias might affect your ability to make objective decisions or judgments. The course aims to help you understand that we are all unconsciously biased, the subconscious nature of bias, that unconscious bias can impact all the decisions we make, how to manage unconscious bias. Training structure. Module 1. Understanding unconscious bias. Are you unconsciously biased? Module 2. Unconscious bias in the workplace. Module 3. Addressing unconscious bias. Addressing your own unconscious bias. Addressing unconscious bias in your organization. Module 4, Why Unconscious Bias Matters.
Now that we've discussed what our training involves, let's take a look at the research and sources behind the theory of unconscious biases.
Unconscious bias theory deals with stereotypes and their related biases that people hold unconsciously and sometimes unknowingly. Unconscious bias theory deals with a multitude of different biases that include, but are not limited to, gender, race, age, parenthood, disability, perceived disability, and other discriminatory bases. This is a common theory found in organizational culture. Organizations have begun to address discriminatory behaviors found within the unconscious bias theory in order to protect the organization from bad press, legal action, and to be in good social standing. There has been an overwhelming amount of research conducted over the topic of unconscious bias and the many theories that fall under this large umbrella term. This has been completed by many researchers and has created bodies of work such as the article Unconscious Bias Training and Assessment of the Evidence for Effectiveness. This work, for example, delves into what unconscious bias training is, how well it can be effective for different goal measurements, and how the training can reach its end. Other research has seen compiled on the Society for Human Resource Management's website page entitled Implicit Bias Resource Guide has created a place for employers and organizations to go when learning what need there is for this training, the effectiveness, how to create the training, implement the training, and have the best outcomes for the organizational goals that may be set. There is a large collection of research that backs the need, importance, implementation, and effectiveness of unconscious bias training, and this is only a small selection of what is used creating this training.
Now that we've viewed sources and theories, let's take a look at proposed context for unconscious bias.
Design considerations for unconscious bias training refer to contextual factors that influence the effectiveness of the training. In order to be considered an effective training, we look at the following aims in our assessment in determining appropriate contextual factors: A, awareness raising, B, implicit bias change, and C, behavior change. Overall, contextual factors refer to the organizational climate or environment and approach to implementing UBT. Within our proposed context, we took the following data into consideration. First, looking at gender participation. Moss-Rakusin conducted a scientific diversity study focusing on gender bias. The pre-test stage identified that male participants hold stronger unconscious gender bias than female participants. This gap was effectively reduced to a non-significant difference by using UBT, demonstrating its effectiveness for men. Next, we looked at mandatory training. The 2013 Business in the Community benchmark trend found that 50% of organizations with higher recruitment of ethnic minorities used a mandatory UBT format for recruitment staff. Next, we look at delivery method. A 2013 Google study divided employees into one of three groups: live workshops, online self-study video of the workshop, or no UBT, which was the control group. The study found, based on self-reporting, that awareness and understanding were higher during post-test for both online and face-to-face, indicating that both could be successfully utilized. We then took duration into account. Divine conducted a prejudice habit-breaking intervention over 12 weeks aimed at increasing awareness, concern about bias effects, and application of reduction strategies. The study found that concern for the impact of implicit bias increased over time, signaling that a longer UBT period is more likely to be effective. Finally, we use IAT, bias reduction strategies, and mindfulness intervention as our UBT content aimed at reducing implicit bias. We then use this data to determine the most appropriate context for our training. Training personnel in groups consisting of at least 25% of their teammates would be effective for this proposed training. We will deliver training to groups of people who work closely together. Although a specific gender has proven more prone to unconscious bias than another, for purposes of camaraderie and equality, all genders will be required to attend the training. The training will be mandatory, with the initial training being face-to-face and follow-up trainings being online. There will be an annual face-to-face refresher training where we integrate new training initiatives if deemed necessary and applicable. The trainings will have a longer duration, with the face-to-face training happening over a period of 4 weeks, where 2 hours of each day are dedicated to the training. The online training sessions will be 1 hour per day for a week's span. The annual follow-up trainings will be 2 hours a day for a period of 4 weeks. IAT, bias reduction, and mindfulness intervention would be appropriate training techniques in context. Mindfulness intervention will aid with hiring practices, bias reduction strategies will aid working relationships, and IAT will help personnel identify any biases they may have, providing them with self-awareness.
So, what are the goals of our unconscious bias training?
In a workforce, unconscious bias training is the answer to the following question: what are the effects of our organizational unconscious bias, and what can we do to address it? When there is training needed in a workforce, there is typically an action, event, or occurrence this training is wanting to target for improvement. With this notion in mind, there must be goals that unconscious bias training should have in mind during creation and implementation in order to create importance and meaning for the training. The goals can also be the mark of effectiveness of the training, as they identify problems and create change within the organizational workforce. In the implementation of our unconscious bias training, we look to address the following SMART goals with our training agenda, focuses, and application in order to give our training both meaning and importance. The goals are as follows. Number 1, raise the retention rate of diversely classified employees at the end of a 3-year period after implementation by 15%. Number 2, cut the number of discriminatory complaints filed within the workplace by 50% by the end of a 3-year period. Number 3, lower the scores of employees on the implicit bias test located on Harvard's website as part of Project Implicit by 5% at the end of the first year the training is implemented. And number 4, increase the level of awareness and education on the topic of unconscious bias for every employee by the end of the first round of implementation, measured by employee surveys. These 4 goals talk about 4 different changes that are expected and wanted to happen at the end of the unconscious bias training. The first goal, raising the retention rate, relates to having a behavior change within the workforce. The second goal, cutting the number of discriminatory complaints, would indicate that a change of behavior and awareness has begun. The third goal of lowering test results would show a true implicit bias change, as there would be a lesser level of bias being portrayed in the workforce. Finally, increasing the awareness level and education level of each employee by the end of training implementation can be measured by a survey in which employees would be asked to give their thoughts on the training and detail anything they learned that they may not have known beforehand. We recognize through research, unconscious bias creates hundreds of seemingly irrational circumstances every day in which people make choices that seem to make no sense and be driven only by overt prejudice, even when they are not. This is the kind of action that our training goals look to address and reduce.
Now that we've heard all the data supporting the unconscious bias theory and the goals our organization has put into place, let's discuss how we have used this research to reach those goals.
UBT will be held annually off-site at the beautiful Hilton Hotel Capitol in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We are conducting training off-site to help grasp the attention of our employees, engage them in the interactive training, and create opportunities for team building outside of the workplace. It is located in a central location for employees and has ample space for breakout rooms, as well as meets our technology needs. For 4 weeks, this face-to-face training will take place for 2 hours each day, followed by the online training component. For the majority of the training, teams from each department will be randomly paired together. A control group of employees will stay at the office and will complete all tests and evaluations, but not participate in the training. This combination of off-site, face-to-face training, and virtual training will be composed of different activity types to ensure that the importance is conveyed to the variety of learners. On the first day of training, our CEO will give a general greeting to the staff and explain the purpose of the training. After her greeting, employees will be directed to use company laptops to complete an unconscious bias test, and then debriefing sessions will be held. Participants will then complete questionnaires to measure traits regarding their ability to make change. Our CEO will then facilitate the Circle of Trust activity, a powerful exercise for demonstrating the effect of affinity bias. By participating in this exercise and training, you hopefully discover and acknowledge your biases via your transparency. After this activity, attendees will return to the office and complete an evaluation of the session. Subsequent trainings will focus on understanding unconscious bias and how employees as individuals, as well as the office as a whole, can identify and find solutions to this issue. All supplies, including laptops, paper, pencil, and handouts, will be provided by the trainees, and light refreshments will be served.
Evaluation of this project will be of an experimental design and include a randomly selected group of staff that will not partake in the training. Instead, they will complete all evaluation and their responses will be compared to that of participants. Pre- and post-test will include a computer-based unconscious bias test that consists of brief, timed categorizations and will help staff self-identify their biases. In addition, staff will complete a paper-based test to measure traits and self-discrepancy that may directly apply to their feelings about change. Evaluation will also include a longitudinal that will measure certain outcomes at 3 different time intervals: before the training, 3 months after the training, and 6 months after the training. They will include the retention rate of employees that identify themselves as minority, the number of personnel grievances based on discrimination, the number of minorities hired.
We hope you have enjoyed learning about this comprehensive training focused on unconscious bias found in a workplace. Our goal, like yours, is to create a work environment where differences are appreciated and every member of staff feels comfortable being themselves.